Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all doing good. Today is Easter Sunday, so the kids are currently asleep back there and I'm just parked up, and I thought I would take this moment of quiet to basically do a video. And I want to talk about how health anxiety caused me to become suicidal, and understandably it's something that I don't like to think about too often now that I'm on the other side. I have a lot of memory loss surrounding that time as well. I think due to just the trauma, but also due to the benzos that I were on. So what happened was, first and foremost, for those who maybe don't know me and don't know my story, my health anxiety started pretty abruptly after the birth of my first child, which was just over 3 years ago. And it progressively got worse and worse and worse. And then there was about a 6-month period in between where I was doing really great. And then I relapsed towards the end of my pregnancy with my second child, my son. And there was a good reason for that. The pregnancy was not straightforward at all. I had a few complications. So when I was about 7 months pregnant, I went into the assessment unit because I had a virus and my heart was beating really fast. I had a fever and I just wanted to make sure that the baby was okay. And when they run my bloods, they came back and they told me that my liver enzymes were all over the place and that they didn't quite know what was going on with my liver. So as you can imagine, for a person with health anxiety, actually being told that there's something wrong was really, really difficult for me. And I had to have an ultrasound, and it turned out that they told me I had something called obstetric cholecystitis, which is a pregnancy-related liver condition, which is pretty rare. The problem is that I didn't have any of the symptoms. So the symptoms are like extreme itching, that's the main one, pain around where your liver is. But I didn't have any of that. And because I didn't have any of that, I didn't believe the diagnosis. And what I thought I had instead, which is crazy now looking back, but I convinced myself that I had bile duct cancer. The reason why I thought I had bile duct cancer is because when I had the ultrasound, I stupidly asked for the ultrasound report and I read it. And you know what it's like when you've got health anxiety and you start reading through all these big words. And it said that I had dilated bile ducts. So of course, where I Googled, I convinced myself that it was in fact bile duct cancer, which for somebody of my age and sex and just my lack of risk factors would be ridiculously rare, for an already rare cancer. So I became absolutely deranged. I was going into hospital every single day. I was totally convinced I had bile duct cancer. I remember one time I was on my hands and knees, heavily pregnant, begging for somebody to help me. Because I was so convinced that I was dying, and that my baby wouldn't make it. Sorry, I got a bit emotional. It was a really bad time. None of my family, like my partner Joe, he couldn't work. My mum couldn't work. My nan was in the hospital with me every day. It was every day for about a month. I was going into the hospital and I was just in tears. I just couldn't cope. Then I started to get other symptoms. So I started to, understandably, because of all this stress that I was under, but I started to get, my whole left side of my face was going numb and tingling, and I was getting excruciating headaches. And so for some reason then I convinced myself that I had a brain tumour. And I'm not proud of this at all because I was pregnant, but I went into A&E the one time, and this is one of my biggest regrets ever, is that I asked for for a CT scan. And they told me that they don't like to do CT scans on pregnant women, but I demanded it. And even now, when I look at my son, and I think, and even though from everything that I've read and everything they told me that the risk to my son, because of how far it is, because I was having a head CT scan, that he wouldn't have got any radiation. But still, the guilt of that will like live with me forever. So I had a head CT scan, and they told me that they saw something on the scan, but they didn't know what it was. I asked if it was a tumour, and they said they were unsure. And then they left me alone in the waiting room. And I had the worst panic attack of my life. They had to give me gas and air because I couldn't breathe. My partner Joe was downstairs, and that was the worst thing. They didn't even, they came in and they told me when I was alone. They didn't even wait until there was somebody with me. And then it was a couple of hours then till the neurologist came and saw me, and I said, can you please tell me, am I dying? And he said, we think you've got something called a dural AV fistula in your brain, and we don't think that you can give birth naturally because this thing could rupture and kill you. I couldn't cope. I couldn't cope. So for the next sort of like 3 weeks after being told that, I started to hallucinate. I was hearing voices. I had insomnia. It was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I could not sleep. I was seeing things. I was smelling things that weren't there. I was just crying constantly. Sorry. It was literally the darkest time of my life. Like, and I didn't want to live anymore. And I made a plan. I sort of made this plan because I was so convinced that I was dying, either from the bile duct cancer or this thing in my brain. I decided that when I was going to give birth, I was going to kill myself because I didn't want to bond with my son for me to then die anyway. And like, it's so fucking twisted, like health anxiety, because anyone who knows me knows that like my kids, I know everyone loves their kids, right? I understand that. But my kids are my absolute world. Like, I can't tell you how much I love my kids. Like, it's unreal. And my kids are my life. Like, they are my soul. And for me to be suicidal and consider leaving my children goes to show, like, how fucking bad health anxiety can be. Anyway, so cut a really long story short, the next, like, 2 months were just insane. So I was told originally that because of this thing in my brain that I couldn't give birth naturally because it could rupture. Then the neurologist said they changed their mind. They spoke to a couple of experts in a different country, and they told me that I could, as long as my blood pressure was being monitored constantly throughout. And like, that just messed with me, because one minute, they're telling me I had to have a C-section, then literally a couple of days before I was due to have the C-section, they told me I could do it naturally. And so I ended up giving birth naturally to my son. It was an amazing birth, even though I was terrified. But at this point, I was on diazepam. Again, I'm not proud of it because I was pregnant, but I had to. I couldn't survive. So my anxiety was a little bit better because I was on those, but I was only on them for 2 weeks. And then my psychiatrist, she wanted me to come off them because they're obviously highly addictive. I gave birth to my son, and then when my son was 6 days old, I had a seizure. A grand mal big seizure. And of course, I thought that it was because of this thing in my brain. Oh, I'm leaving out so many details. So basically they told me that as soon as I gave birth to my son, they were going to rush me off and they were going to give me an MRI to see exactly what this thing was in my brain. But what actually happened was that the doctors came around and they told me that they were now going to treat me as an outpatient and they would see me in 6 weeks' time. And I couldn't cope with that. And my dad was arguing with people in the hospital. Joe was arguing with the doctors. I'm not a person to complain, but I put in complaints because the inconsistencies were ridiculous. One minute they were giving me a plan and then the next minute they were taking that away from me. And I was saying to them, you can't do that to me. I can't go home for 6 weeks, be with my newborn baby, thinking that there's this ticking time bomb in my head. And so then they told me that they weren't going to do, it wasn't an MRI that they needed to do, they needed to do a cerebral angiogram, which is where they thread a catheter through an artery in your groin and they thread it basically up to your sort of like neck and they release like ink and they can see what's going on with your veins. So that's what I was waiting for. But in the meantime, whilst I was waiting for that, I started to have seizures. And of course, I thought it was because of this thing in my brain. So I was going to A&E every time that they happened. And the one time the neurosurgeon came down and he said, this isn't because of this thing that we think might be in your brain, right? And I said, of course it is. Why else would I be having seizures? And he said, yeah, but the area of concern in your brain scan wouldn't cause seizures. It's in the wrong place. So I was like, well, what's causing my seizures then? Anyway, so I ended up having an EEG done and all of these tests. And it was concluded that the reason why I was having the seizures was extreme stress. So I literally gave myself seizures. They were functional seizures. So there was no reason for them. And my stress levels were triggering them. And I had 3 of them and they were awful. And the one time I lost control of my bladder and I weed all over my carpet. And yeah, so amongst this, I tried to kill myself. Once in hospital, I wrapped a rope thing, this dangly thing around my neck. And it was actually an emergency pull for the shower. So of course, people ran in. The second time was I left the house, and I had plans to go and kill myself. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just decided I was going to go and kill myself. My son was like less than 2 weeks old. Obviously, the police were called. People were out looking for me. And I was found pretty swiftly. Policeman found me and took me to one of our mental hospitals here in the UK, in Wales. And I was put into the crisis team. I'd already been into the crisis team once when I was pregnant, which is something I forgot. It's really blurry. But the crisis team are brilliant because you have 10 days with them and they are there 24/7. You can ring them at 3:00 in the morning. They bring your medication at any time. You can have somebody come to your house every day to speak. So I was under the crisis team. Gosh, what happened next? Anyway, the end point of this was that my liver returned to normal post-pregnancy. So the diagnosis of what the doctors told me of the septic cholecystitis was correct, and I was wrong. I didn't have bile duct cancer. And then the thing about my brain, so I ended up having the angiogram. There was a cancellation, and I took the cancellation, and I went in and I had it done, and it was horrific because you're awake. And I was laying there on the table while I was having this procedure done, and the radiosurgeon looked at me and he said, all fine. I literally broke down crying. I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, there's no fistula. He was like, it's absolutely fine. And I remember being wheeled back into the recovery room thinking, this can't be right. You've told me that I had this thing in my brain and now you're telling me it's gone. And I couldn't accept that. So I requested to speak to the neurosurgeons, and they had a multidisciplinary team meeting about me. And they all concluded, based on the angiogram, that there was no fistula. So whatever they saw originally had gone. I wasn't satisfied. So I paid privately for another neurosurgeon to view my angiogram, and he said the same thing. There was no fistula. And then I got the official letter that stated that there was no fistula, and it really took me a long time to let that go, because I was, towards the end of that journey, I was weirdly coming to terms with the fact that there was something very dangerously wrong in my brain and that I might have to have brain surgery. And I, even though my health anxiety hated that, I kind of got to the point where I was suicidal, I was depressed, I rose back from the ashes, and I went into kind of like fight mode. And I was like, right, okay, I've got this problem in my brain, but I'm going to fix it. So I'm going to have the surgery, I'm going to have it immobilized, and I'm going to get on with my life. But obviously that never needed to happen, and they still don't know what it was that they originally saw. They think that my pregnancy may have been causing some veins to look engorged around the back of my head in my brain. And yeah, it even now to this day, now and again, I'm like a year and a half on, I have these moments where I'm like, yeah, but what if should I get another neurosurgeon to look at my my images and stuff? But I try to let it go. I try to think, Sherelle, you've had multiple people look at this now, professionals, and they've all concluded that there's no dural AV fistula. So yeah, it was really, really tough, really tough. And for some reason, after that had happened and I had gone through that whole experience of being like, totally suicidal, and I mean, there's so much I've left out, like I could go on and on and on, but I just then became stronger than ever. I hitting rock bottom and surrendering it to all and just thinking, fuck it. It did something to me, and now I'm filled with joy like 90% of the time. I value the little things so much, and I wake up every morning and I'm like, I'm choosing to be happy today, because you know what, for me now, what scares me way more than health anxiety is where I was a year ago. Like that shit is terrifying. Like, to be hallucinating, to have voices in your head, to be smelling things that are not there, to have insomnia, to really want to die, to actually want to end your life and to make plans, that scares me way more than cancer, motor neurons disease, anything. That shit terrifies me, to actually lose yourself, fully lose yourself. It was just the hardest thing I've ever been through. But you know what, in some twisted kind of way, in some twisted kind of way, I'm actually really grateful for it. And I have these two. What's wrong, darling? She's confused, so I'm going to stop this video right now and see to the children. But thanks for listening.